36 hours. That's how long it took to bring my daughter Aria into this world. 36 hours of blinding, bone-crushing agony, fluorescent hospital lights, and the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into your marrow. When the nurse finally wheeled me out to the hospital drop-off zone, my entire body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. Every movement sent a sharp, stinging reminder of the stitches and the physical toll of a complicated delivery. But as I sat in the back of the private car service, I had booked for myself, holding the tiny, swaddled weight of my newborn against my chest, all I could think about was my bed. A hot shower. The nursery I had spent the last 7 months decorating with my own 2 hands. Marcus, my husband of 5 years, wasn't at the hospital to drive us home. He had kissed my forehead 3 hours earlier, grabbed his jacket, and told me he needed to rush back to the house. "I want everything to be absolutely perfect for my 2 girls," he had whispered, his eyes crinkling with that smile I had loved since the day we met. "I need to get the heat going and make sure the house is warm. Take a premium car service. I'll be waiting at the door." I had believed him. The car pulled up to the curb of my 2-story colonial home. The November wind in Massachusetts was unforgiving. The trees were stripped of their leaves, and the gray afternoon sky threatened sleet. The driver offered to help me to the door, but maternal adrenaline made me shake my head. I thanked him carefully, hoisted the heavy infant car seat onto my arm, and grabbed the handle of my hospital duffel bag, gritting my teeth as pain ripped through my lower abdomen. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the icy wind bite at my cheeks. I looked up at the house. I had purchased this property entirely on my own in cash, 3 years before I even met Marcus. It was the ultimate symbol of everything I had overcome. From growing up in a cramped apartment with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to becoming a self-made real estate investor by 32, this house was my sanctuary. Aria let out a soft, high-pitched whimper, her tiny face scrunching up against the sudden drop in temperature. "I know, sweet girl," I murmured, shivering as the wind sliced through my wool coat. "We're home." I hobbled up the front brick walkway, each step feeling like I was dragging lead weights. My legs were shaking violently by the time I reached the covered porch. I set my heavy bag down on the welcome mat, balanced Aria's car seat carefully against my hip, and fumbled in my purse for my keys. My fingers were completely numb from the cold as I found my key ring. I slid the familiar brass key into the front door lock. It didn't go in. I frowned, shifting my weight, wincing as another wave of postpartum pain shot through me. My vision blurred slightly from sheer exhaustion. I pulled the key out, wiped it on my coat, and tried again. It slid in halfway, then jammed. It wouldn't turn. "Come on," I muttered, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I jiggled the handle, locked tight. That's when I looked closer at the hardware. The lock wasn't the brushed bronze deadbolt I had installed 5 years ago. It was a shiny, brand-new smart lock keypad. My breath caught in my throat. My brain, clouded by sleep deprivation and pain medication, struggled to process what I was looking at. Why would the locks be changed? Marcus hadn't said a single word about replacing the front door hardware. Aria began to cry, a thin, reedy wail that pierced the freezing air. The wind howled across the porch, whipping my hair across my face. I was shivering so hard my teeth clicked together. I reached for the doorbell and pressed it, leaning heavily against the doorframe for physical support. I waited. Nothing. I pressed it again, holding it down. "Marcus!" I yelled, my voice cracking and carrying away in the wind. "Marcus, open the door! It's freezing out here!" Panic, cold and sharp, began to uncoil in my chest. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy and stiff, and dialed his number. It rang 3 times before going straight to voicemail. I stepped back from the door, the cold now seeping through my boots, and looked around. That was when I saw it. Taped to the frosted glass sidelight of the front door, just at eye level, was a piece of white printer paper. It hadn't just been taped up hastily. It was neatly enclosed in a thick, clear plastic lamination sleeve protecting it from the harsh winter elements. Someone had taken the time to go to a print shop for this. I leaned in, my heart hammering against my ribs, and read the bold black typed letters. Maya, taking over the house for our annual family staycation. Enjoy your recovery at the clinic. We need the space. Eleanor. I stared at the words. I read them again, and then a third time. The letters seemed to swim and distort in front of my eyes. Eleanor. My mother-in-law. My stomach plummeted, hitting the icy concrete beneath my feet. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the railing to keep from collapsing. Eleanor, who had always looked at my success with thinly veiled contempt. Eleanor, who had spent the last 5 years treating my hard-earned home like a free luxury hotel for her and her entitled daughter Chloe. They had locked me out. On the day I was bringing my newborn daughter home from the hospital. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, this is a sick, twisted joke. I abandoned my bags on the porch and carried Aria's car seat toward the large bay window that looked directly into my formal living room. The glass was frosted at the edges from the cold, but the center provided a clear, unobstructed view of the interior. The inside of my home was bathed in the warm, inviting glow of the fireplace. The flames danced merrily, casting flickering light across my custom velvet sectional. And there, sitting on my furniture, were the people who were supposed to be my family. Eleanor was reclining in my favorite leather armchair, her feet propped up on the mahogany coffee table, a crystal wine glass held loosely in her manicured hand. Chloe, my sister-in-law, was sprawled across the sofa, scrolling through her phone, wearing one of my expensive silk robes that she must have taken directly from my master bathroom. But that wasn't what made the blood freeze in my veins. That wasn't what caused a scream of pure, unadulterated betrayal to build in the back of my throat. It was the man standing by the kitchen island laughing. Marcus. He was wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater, holding a bottle of my vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle I had been saving to celebrate Aria's birth. He poured a generous glass for his mother, threw his head back and laughed at something she said. He looked completely relaxed, completely at home. He knew. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind completely out of my lungs. He hadn't rushed home from the hospital to prepare the house for me. He had rushed home to orchestrate this. He had changed the locks. He had let them in. He had agreed to lock his bleeding, exhausted wife and his newborn baby out in the freezing cold so his mother could have a staycation. Tears of sheer disbelief and rising fury blurred my vision. Aria was fully crying now, her little body shaking in the car seat despite the heavy blankets. The cold was becoming dangerous. We needed to get inside. I raised my fist and slammed it against the thick window pane. The sound was a loud, sharp thud that echoed over the howling wind. I banged my fist against the glass again, harder this time. "Marcus!" I screamed, the sound tearing at my raw throat. "Open the door! Aria is freezing! Open the damn door!" Inside the living room, the movement stopped. Eleanor paused with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Chloe looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in annoyance. And Marcus turned. He slowly set the wine bottle down on the granite counter. He walked toward the bay window, his steps unhurried, casual. He stopped just on the other side of the glass, less than 3 feet away from me. The thick pane of glass was the only thing separating my freezing reality from his warm betrayal. I held up Aria's car seat, tears streaming down my freezing cheeks. "Please," I mouthed through the glass, my chest heaving with silent sobs. "Please, it's freezing." Marcus looked at me. He looked at the heavy bags beneath my eyes. He looked at my pale, shivering lips. He looked down at the tiny crying infant bundled in the car seat. He made direct, unflinching eye contact with me. There was no surprise in his eyes. There was no guilt. There wasn't even a flicker of regret. He simply stared at me for 3 agonizingly long seconds. Then, without a single word, my husband turned his back, walked over to the sofa, and sat down next to his mother. The heavy thump of Marcus dropping onto my custom velvet sectional echoed in my mind, long after the visual registered. I stood frozen on the frost-covered brick of my own front porch, the icy wind whipping my hair across my face, while my newborn daughter whimpered against my chest. He didn't just walk away. He sat down. He picked up a crystal wine glass. He laughed at something his mother said, his head thrown back in a portrait of absolute ease. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it rooted me to the spot. My stitches throbbed with a burning intensity, a harsh physical manifestation of the betrayal tearing through my marriage. I pulled my heavy wool coat tighter around Aria, shielding her tiny, fragile body from the biting Massachusetts wind. My breath plumed in the freezing air as the adrenaline of my arrival finally gave way to a chilling, terrifying clarity. Standing there in the bitter cold, my mind began to race backward, furiously piecing together the glaring red flags I had spent the last 5 years desperately trying to ignore. How had I let myself become so blinded by love that I didn't see the parasites draining my lifeblood? I was 38 years old and I had built my life entirely from scratch. Growing up in a cramped, drafty apartment with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on, I learned early that nobody was coming to save me. I had to save myself. I worked grueling double shifts through college, saving every spare dime to buy my first rundown duplex at 25. A decade of 80-hour weeks, relentless renovations, and strategic property flips had turned that single duplex into a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. This beautiful, sprawling colonial house I was currently locked out of, I had purchased it in cash, free and clear, 3 years before I ever met Marcus. It was the ultimate symbol of everything I had overcome. It was my sanctuary. When Marcus and I married, I foolishly allowed him to move into my fully paid-off home without requiring him to contribute to the equity. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, making a modest salary, but he was charming, attentive, and swore he wanted to build an equal partnership. I wanted to believe him. I wanted a partner so badly that I ignored the deeply parasitic dynamic of his family. To Eleanor and Chloe, my hard-earned wealth wasn't the result of my blood, sweat, and tears. It was their communal piggy bank. The entitlement had crept in slowly then, all at once. First, it was Chloe borrowing my designer handbags and conveniently losing them. Then it was Eleanor hosting extravagant luncheons for her high society friends at my house, subtly taking credit for the expensive catering I had paid for. Marcus always had an excuse for them. "They're just excited for us, Maya. Family shares." But the mask completely slipped just weeks before my due date. It was a Sunday evening, exactly 4 weeks before my water broke. I had hosted them for a family dinner. My ankles were swollen to the size of grapefruits, my lower back radiating a dull, continuous, agonizing ache. Yet I had spent 6 hours on my feet preparing a standing rib roast, because Marcus insisted his mother expected a proper traditional Sunday dinner. They sat at my custom-built mahogany dining table, drinking the imported Pinot Noir I had purchased from a private vineyard in Napa. Chloe, swirling her glass with practiced boredom, let out a dramatic sigh. Her boutique, an overpriced, aesthetically barren vanity project located in a high-rent downtown district, was predictably tanking. "I just need a bridge loan," Chloe whined, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the crystal. "50,000 would cover the rent arrears and the new spring inventory. I'll pay you back when sales pick up next quarter." Eleanor hadn't even looked at Marcus. Her predatory gaze locked directly onto me, expecting immediate compliance. "Maya, you just closed on that massive commercial property downtown. You can certainly spare a fraction of that to save your sister-in-law's livelihood. It's a drop in the bucket for you." I had set my fork down, pregnancy exhaustion making my patience paper thin. Eleanor, my capital is strictly tied up in escrow and active renovations. I don't mix my business assets with personal loans, especially not for a failing retail model with zero proven ROI. The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor's face hardened, the mask of the polite, doting mother-in-law dissolving instantly to reveal the grasping, entitled woman beneath. "You are unbelievably selfish and controlling," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You sit in this big empty house hoarding your wealth while your own family struggles. It's disgusting. You have no idea what loyalty means." I looked to my husband, waiting for him to defend me, to defend the woman currently carrying his child. Marcus had stood up, refusing to meet my eyes, and gently gripped my elbow, steering me forcefully into the kitchen. I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to tell them to pack their coats and leave. Instead, he backed me against the marble counter, his face pale and anxious. "Maya, please," he had whispered, casting a nervous glance toward the dining room. "Just write the check. You make that kind of money in a month. Just do it to keep the peace. Don't make her angry right now, you know how she gets." "Keep the peace?" I asked, staring at him as if he were a complete stranger. "It's $50,000, Marcus. I worked relentlessly for years to build my portfolio. I'm not an ATM for your sister's hobbies." "You're being unreasonable," he muttered, grabbing another bottle of wine from the rack to take back to his mother. "It's just money. If you really love this family, you wouldn't make such a big deal out of it." It was never just money. It was about power. It was about unchecked access. It was about a family that viewed me not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, and certainly not as the mother of their new grandchild, but purely as a host organism to be drained dry. A violent, sharp gust of wind ripped across the porch, snapping me brutally back to the present. My teeth clicked together so hard my jaw ached. Aria let out another wail, her tiny, frantic cries muffled by the thick layers of her fleece bunting. The temperature was plummeting rapidly, the sun dipping below the horizon and plunging my front porch into icy, unforgiving shadows. My postpartum body was rapidly failing. A sickening warm rush of blood soaked through my heavy maternity pads, a terrifying reminder that I was less than 48 hours out of a grueling, medically complicated labor. I needed to sit down. I needed a doctor. I needed a safe, warm place for my infant. I set my heavy hospital duffel bag down on the frosted bricks and fumbled with my purse. My numb, stiff fingers blindly searched the bottom of my bag for my phone. I needed to call a cab, a friend, a hotel, anyone to get us out of this freezing nightmare. I finally gripped the cold metal of my phone and pulled it out, the screen illuminating the darkening porch. Before I could even open my contacts, a bright push notification illuminated the lock screen. It was an alert from my premium home security application, the state-of-the-art system I had paid $10,000 to install to protect this very property. My blood ran completely cold, dropping to a temperature far colder than the winter air biting at my exposed skin. System alert. All exterior cameras and motion sensors have been manually disabled. I stared at the timestamp beneath the alert, my heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. Authorized by Marcus. Time: 4:15 p.m. Exactly 1 hour before I arrived home from the hospital. I shoved my phone deep into my coat pocket, the screen going dark, but the reality of that security alert remained burned into my retinas. He had meticulously planned this. My own husband had sat on his phone in my hospital room holding my hand while I breathed through agonizing contractions and quietly disabled our home security system so his mother could stage a coup. The shock paralyzing my limbs evaporated instantly, replaced by a fierce maternal adrenaline. I was not going to stand on my own porch and freeze. I shifted Aria's heavy car seat onto my forearm, gritting my teeth, as a fresh wave of fire ripped through my abdominal stitches and raised my free hand. I brought my fist down hard on the solid oak of the front door. Bang, bang, bang. The heavy thuds echoed loudly over the whistling wind. Inside, the muffled laughter abruptly stopped. I didn't pause. I slammed my fist against the wood again, the side of my hand throbbing with the impact. "Open the door!" I yelled, my voice cracking in the frigid air. "Marcus, open this door right now!" For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The porch light flickered above me, casting long, frantic shadows across the frosted brick. Then I heard the heavy metallic slide of the deadbolt. The door cracked open just a few inches, releasing a rush of glorious heated air that smelled of roasting garlic and the expensive Cabernet they were drinking. Before I could push my way inside, Marcus slipped out onto the porch and swiftly pulled the door shut behind him, the latch clicking securely into place. He stood there in the freezing cold, wearing only his lightweight cashmere sweater and a pair of tailored slacks. He didn't reach for me. He didn't reach for the newborn daughter he had just welcomed into the world 2 days prior. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets and looked at me with an expression of profound, irritated exhaustion. "Keep your voice down, Maya," he hissed, glancing nervously back at the frosted glass. "You are making a massive scene." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of his words. "A scene." I choked out, my teeth chattering so violently I could barely form the syllables. "I am locked out of my own house, Marcus. I just gave birth. Open the door and let us in." He let out a long, patronizing sigh, the kind of exhale a teacher gives an unruly toddler. "Look, we talked about this. Well, my mother and I talked about this. She has her book club friends coming into town tomorrow, and her place is a mess right now. She needed a luxury space to host them for the week. They want to use the chef's kitchen, the heated pool. You know how important this is for her networking. Are you out of your mind?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and physical agony. "I live here. I just had a baby. I am bleeding. Marcus, I need my bed. I need my shower, and Aria needs to be inside." Marcus's gaze swept over me, taking in my pale face, the dark circles under my eyes, and the oversized sweatpants I was wearing beneath my coat. His upper lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer of disgust. "Exactly," he said, keeping his voice in that maddeningly calm, lowered register. "You're a mess right now. Postpartum recovery it's messy. There's crying, there's medical equipment, there's nurses stopping by. It's going to completely ruin the family vibe my mother is trying to cultivate this week. You can't expect her to host her high society friends with a screaming infant in the background." I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to ice. He was speaking about me, about his child, as if we were an inconvenient pest infestation he had hired an exterminator to deal with. Aria, as if sensing my escalating panic, let out a sharp, breathless wail from beneath her blankets. Her tiny face was turning an alarming shade of red, the biting wind proving too much for her fragile brand-new system. "Look at her!" I cried out, lifting the car seat slightly toward him. My arms were shaking so badly I could barely hold the carrier. "Marcus, she is shivering. She is your daughter. Please just let me get her inside where it's warm. You can figure out whatever nonsense your mother wants later, but my baby needs to be warm." He didn't even glance down at the car seat. His eyes remained locked on my face, utterly devoid of any warmth, any empathy, any human connection whatsoever. He looked at me with the blank, hollow detachment of a stranger. "You're milking this," he said flatly. "Women have babies every day. You're just trying to manipulate the situation to get your way and upset Eleanor. I'm not going to let you ruin her staycation just because you want to be controlling." "Marcus, please." I begged, the last shred of my pride shattering as physical pain brought tears to my eyes. My legs were buckling. "I am begging you. I am in so much pain." "Just go find a motel," he interrupted, pulling his hand out of his pocket and reaching for his leather wallet. "There's a perfectly fine roadside place about 2 miles down the highway. Go check in there for the week. Let my mother have her time, and when her guests leave, you can come back. It's not that complicated." He flipped open his wallet. I watched in a state of horrific paralysis as his fingers bypassed the thick stack of hundreds and pulled out a single crisp $50 bill. He stepped closer to me. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the rich aroma of my vintage wine made my stomach heave. He reached out, but not to touch me, not to comfort me. He reached past my trembling arms and shoved the folded $50 bill aggressively into the front pocket of my winter coat. "Go get a warm meal at the diner near the highway," he instructed, his tone dripping with fake benevolence, as if he were a philanthropist dropping coins into a beggar's tin. "Get yourself a room. We'll call you on Sunday when the house is cleared out." Before I could even formulate a word, before I could scream or throw the money back in his treacherous face, he pivoted on his heel. He grabbed the brass handle of my front door, pulled it open, and slipped back into the suffocating warmth of my home. The heavy thud of the door closing was followed instantly by the sharp metallic click of the smart lock engaging. I was alone again on the freezing porch. I don't remember the walk back down the driveway. I don't remember the agonizing process of lifting my boots over the icy concrete, my abdominal muscles screaming in protest with every shift of my weight. All I remember is the primal, desperate need to get my daughter out of the wind. I reached my SUV, yanked the back door open, and practically collapsed against the leather seats as I clicked Aria's carrier into its base. I slammed the door shut, climbed into the driver's seat, and punched the ignition. I cranked the heat to its absolute maximum. The vents roared to life, blasting hot, dry air directly into my frozen face. I gripped the leather steering wheel with both hands, my knuckles turning white, and finally let go. I shattered. Deep, guttural sobs tore their way up my throat, the kind of crying that starves your lungs of oxygen and leaves you gasping. I wept for the illusion of my marriage. I wept for the man I thought I loved. I wept for the utter humiliation of standing on my own porch, begging for entry into a home I had paid for with my own blood and sweat, only to be paid off with a $50 bill, like a discarded stray dog. Aria's cries slowly subsided as the cabin of the car warmed her breathing, evening out into a soft, exhausted rhythm. The sound of her quiet breaths was like a switch flipping in the dark. The suffocating wave of despair suddenly receded, pulled back by an undertow of something entirely different. The tears stopped. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, taking a long, shuddering breath. I looked at the $50 bill crumpled on the passenger seat where I had thrown it. "He thinks I have nowhere to go. He thinks he holds the power." I unbuckled my seatbelt and leaned awkwardly across the center console. I popped open the glove compartment. Inside, beneath the vehicle registration and a stack of old maintenance receipts, was a heavy manila envelope. As a self-made woman who had spent a decade navigating the vicious world of commercial and residential real estate, I never moved blindly. I always kept emergency contingencies. My attorney David had insisted on it years ago. I pulled the envelope onto my lap and broke the seal. Inside was a stack of legal paperwork for my primary LLC, the exact corporate entity that held the title to the very house Marcus and his mother were currently partying inside. Because I had purchased the property before our marriage, and because our ironclad prenuptial agreement legally severed his right to my premarital assets, the home was entirely legally and irrefutably mine to dispose of as I saw fit. I pulled out the top document. It was a blank, pre-notarized transfer deed of sale. My thumb traced the raised seal at the bottom of the page, right next to my own verified signature. I stared at the blank lines, waiting for a buyer's name, the crisp paper illuminated by the harsh glow of the dashboard lights. The freezing cold outside my windows was nothing compared to the absolute zero running through my veins right now. I jammed the SUV in to drive my tires spinning against the frost-slicked asphalt as I pulled away from the beautiful home I owned. The heater was finally roaring, blowing hot, dry air onto my face, but I couldn't stop shaking. My teeth clicked together in a rapid, uncontrollable rhythm. Aria slept soundly in the back, the rhythmic hum of the engine lulling her into a false sense of security, completely oblivious to the fact that her father had just discarded us like trash in the winter wind. My first instinct was to go to the upscale Marriott 10 minutes away. I parked under their brightly lit awning, left the engine running to keep Aria warm, and limped into the lobby. My lower abdomen throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, the sheer physical exertion of the last 2 hours aggravating the fresh stitches from my complicated delivery. I leaned heavily on the marble reception desk, sliding my platinum debit card toward the clerk to book a suite. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the clerk said softly, swiping the card a second time. "It's coming up as insufficient funds." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. Try this one." I handed her a secondary card tied to my and Marcus's joint household account. She swiped it, shook her head. "Declined. I'm so sorry." I stood there staring at the polished marble counter, the reality of my husband's treachery deepening into something much darker than a simple lockout. He hadn't just given his mother my house. He had drained our joint checking accounts to ensure I couldn't comfortably survive the night. He wanted me desperate. He wanted me punished for daring to interrupt Eleanor's vacation. I returned to the car, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps of pain. My only option was the $50 bill Marcus had shoved into my pocket like a dirty insult, plus a few crumpled 20s I kept in my center console for emergencies. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the flickering neon glow of the Starlight Motel on the dilapidated edge of town. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour, its parking lot dotted with rusted cars and shadowed corners. I paid the man behind the bulletproof glass in cash, ignoring the suspicious look he gave my tear-stained face and heavy winter coat. Room 114 smelled of stale cigarette smoke, industrial bleach, and cheap pine air freshener. The carpet was a sticky, matted brown. The floral bedspread looked like it hadn't been washed since the 90s. I carefully set Aria's car seat on top of the small, scuffed wooden desk against the wall. It was the only surface that looked remotely clean. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the drive was rapidly crashing, leaving behind a profound, terrifying physical vulnerability. I hobbled into the cramped, yellow-lit bathroom and locked the door. Stripping off my clothes, I confronted the brutal reality of my postpartum body. I was bleeding heavily. Every movement sent a searing, white-hot flash of pain through my pelvis. I leaned over the stained porcelain sink, gripping the edges until my knuckles turned white, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. I was a 38-year-old woman with a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio, shivering in a seedy roadside motel, bleeding through my clothes because my husband didn't want to ruin his mother's vibe. I pressed a clean towel to my face, letting out a ragged, muffled sob. The absolute indignity of it threatened to crush me. I had worked so hard to build a fortress for my daughter to ensure she would never know the cold, desperate poverty I had grown up in, and Marcus had stripped it all away in a matter of hours. I managed to change my postpartum dressings, put on the oversized sweatpants from my hospital bag, and slowly made my way back into the main room. I sat on the very edge of the lumpy mattress, wrapping my arms around my torso. Buzz. My phone vibrated against the cheap laminate of the nightstand. I reached for it, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The notification was from a group text chat titled Staycation Squad. Chloe, my entitled sister-in-law, had somehow forgotten to remove me from the family thread she created earlier that week. I opened the message. "Chloe house is amazing. Made some space in the extra room for the margarita station. Thanks for setting it up. Mark." Below the text was a photo. My breath hitched in my throat. It was Aria's nursery. I had spent 7 months designing that room. I had hand-painted a delicate birch forest mural on the back wall. I had custom-ordered a plush, cream-colored rocking chair for late-night feedings. I had painstakingly assembled the imported mahogany crib where my daughter was supposed to sleep her very first night at home. In the photo, the crib was gone. It had been shoved haphazardly out into the hallway, its frame visibly scratched against the door jamb. In its place, right against my hand-painted mural, Chloe had set up a folding plastic table covered in bottles of tequila sticky margarita mix and a massive crushed ice blender. My pristine cream-colored rug was already stained with a splash of neon green syrup. They hadn't just taken my house. They had desecrated my daughter's sanctuary. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. I stared at the spilled syrup on my baby's rug. I stared at the crib shoved into the hallway like garbage. I didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears instantly evaporated, burned away by a sudden absolute terrifying clarity. The shattered weeping woman who had stood on that freezing porch, begging for scraps of basic human decency, died right there on the edge of that motel bed. In her place, something cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless woke up. I stood up, ignoring the shooting pain in my abdomen. I walked over to my hospital bag and pulled out my laptop. Then I grabbed the heavy manila envelope I had retrieved from my glove compartment, the emergency corporate file containing the blank pre-notarized transfer deed for my real estate LLC. I checked the time. It was 1:45 a.m. I didn't care. I pulled up my contacts and dialed David. David wasn't just a lawyer. He was a shark. I kept him on retainer specifically for commercial real estate disputes, the kind of man who ate aggressive corporate landlords for breakfast and billed by the minute. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly but instantly alert. "Maya, you just had a baby 2 days ago. Why are you calling me at 2 in the morning?" "David," I said, my voice eerily calm, resonating with a terrifying stillness. "I need you to open your secure portal. I'm sending you scans of my LLC formation documents, the deed to the Maple Street property, and the prenuptial agreement we drafted 5 years ago." I heard the rustle of sheets and the heavy click of a laptop opening on his end. "What's going on?" "Marcus locked me out of the house," I stated flatly. "He disabled the security cameras, drained our joint checking accounts, and moved his mother and sister in for a vacation. I am currently sitting in a motel room with my newborn daughter." The silence on the line was thick and dangerous. "Are you safe?" David finally asked, his tone dropping an octave. "I am safe," I replied, booting up my laptop and connecting to my phone's hotspot. "But Marcus made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thinks because we are married, he has a right to the home. He thinks he holds the power because he changed the deadbolts." I scanned the blank transfer deed using my phone and uploaded it to David's encrypted server. "Look at page 4 of the prenup, David. Look at the LLC holding structure. I purchased that house in cash prior to the marriage. Marcus's name was never added to the deed. He has 0 equity, 0 claim, and 0 legal standing as an owner." I heard the rapid, heavy clicking of David's keyboard. For 3 long minutes, the only sound in the dingy motel room was Aria's soft breathing and the fierce, rhythmic pounding of my own heart. Suddenly, David let out a low, sharp whistle. "Maya," David said, his voice laced with a lethal professional thrill. "They didn't just make a mistake. They handed you the nuclear codes." "Explain," I demanded. "Your LLC structure isolates the property entirely from marital assets. Marcus is legally classified as a non-equity occupant, and this pre-signed transfer deed you just uploaded." David paused, letting the weight of the reality settle between us. "You don't need his permission. You don't need a divorce decree. You have the absolute, uncontested legal right to sell this property to a third party right this second." The click of the phone ending the call with David echoed loudly in the cramped, dingy confines of room 114. The screen of my laptop glowed with the uploaded legal documents, a digital beacon of my impending retaliation. But as the fierce protective adrenaline that had fueled my conversation with my attorney began to recede, a terrifying new sensation violently took its place. My teeth began to chatter again, but this time it had absolutely nothing to do with the drafty motel room. A deep, bone-rattling chill seized my body. I pulled the thin, scratchy floral bedspread over my shoulders, but the cold felt internal, radiating outward from my core. Seconds later, the freezing sensation vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating, unbearable wave of heat. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes while my lower abdomen pulsed with a sharp, localized agony that made me double over entirely. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. The room spun sickeningly. I pressed a trembling hand to my forehead. It was burning. The heavy bleeding, the excruciating pelvic pain, the sudden violent temperature spikes my postpartum body was in the throes of a severe infection. Panic, absolute and primal, clawed at my throat. I looked over at Aria, who was sleeping peacefully in her car seat on the scratched desk. I was the only thing standing between my newborn daughter and the harsh, unforgiving world. If I passed out in this cheap motel, if I went into septic shock, nobody would know we were here. Marcus hadn't even bothered to ask where we were going. I could die in this room and he wouldn't find out until the motel manager came knocking for checkout. I couldn't let that happen. The midnight drive. Summoning a strength I didn't know I possessed, I forced myself off the lumpy mattress. Every step was an excruciating negotiation with my own body. I managed to pull my heavy wool coat back on over my sweatpants, hoisted Aria's car seat onto my forearm, and staggered out into the biting winter night. The drive to the nearest 24-hour urgent care clinic was a blur of icy roads and my own frantic, feverish panting. I gripped the steering wheel with sweaty palms, fighting the dark spots dancing at the edges of my vision. When I finally pushed through the sliding glass doors of the clinic, the harsh fluorescent lights felt like physical blows. The overnight receptionist took one look at my pale, sweat-drenched face, and the newborn clutched to my chest, and immediately bypassed the waiting room, ushering me straight into an examination bay. The clinical smell of alcohol wipes and latex gloves grounded me slightly as I collapsed onto the crinkly paper of the exam table. The on-call physician, a kind-eyed woman with tired shoulders, examined me with swift professionalism. Her expression grew grim as she checked my vitals and the site of my stitches. "You have a significant postpartum infection, Maya," the doctor said softly, pulling off her gloves. "Your fever is dangerously high. You are severely dehydrated and physically exhausted. I'm going to administer a strong dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics right now via injection, but you desperately need your prescribed recovery medications, specialized wound care supplies, and absolute bed rest. My medications are at my house," I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly frail. "In my master bathroom. You need to call whoever is at your house to bring them to you immediately, along with clean clothes and your infant's supplies," she instructed firmly. "If your fever doesn't break by morning, I will have no choice but to admit you to the hospital." The final betrayal. The doctor stepped out to prep the injection, leaving me alone in the sterile, quiet room. The hum of the medical refrigerator in the corner was the only sound. I stared at my phone. The battery was at 15%. I didn't want to call him. The very thought of Marcus's voice made my skin crawl. But the doctor's warning echoed in my feverish brain. I needed my antibiotics. I needed the heavy-duty painkillers locked in my medicine cabinet. I needed clean maternity pads and fresh clothes. I was utterly out of options. Swallowing the bitter taste of bile and pride, I opened my contacts and pressed the green icon next to my husband's name. I held the phone to my ear, my hand shaking violently. Ring, ring, click. He didn't answer. He forwarded the call directly to voicemail. I pulled the phone away from my face, staring at the screen in disbelief. Before I could even attempt to dial again, a text message popped up. "Marcus, Stop trying to guilt trip us. We are relaxing in the hot tub. Deal with it yourself. I read the words 3 times. We are relaxing in the hot tub. Deal with it yourself. He was sitting in the heated, custom-built cedar hot tub in my backyard, drinking wine with his parasitic mother and sister, while his wife burned with a severe infection in a fluorescent-lit clinic holding his 2-day-old child. In that exact fraction of a second, the very last ember of the woman who had loved Marcus Blackwood was permanently extinguished. The feverish haze clouding my mind instantly shattered, replaced by a clarity so cold and absolute it felt like breathing liquid nitrogen. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. The fear, the pain, the vulnerability, it all vanished beneath a towering glacial wave of pure, calculated fury. He wanted me to deal with it myself. So be it. The deal of a lifetime. The doctor returned administering the antibiotic injection and handing me a paper bag filled with sample-sized pain relievers to get me through the night. I thanked her, my voice now completely steady, completely devoid of the trembling weakness from just 10 minutes prior. I carried Aria back out to the SUV, the freezing winter air feeling entirely insignificant against the ice in my veins. I strapped her into her base, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I pulled my laptop from my bag, resting it against the steering wheel, and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. I opened my email. I didn't need to search for the contact. His name was burned into my memory from a fierce bidding war 2 years ago, Thomas Vance. Vance was the CEO of Apex Corporate Housing. He was a notoriously ruthless, deep-pocketed real estate investor who specialized in flipping high-end suburban homes into luxury, fully furnished short-term corporate rentals for visiting tech executives. He operated with cash moved with terrifying speed and had zero tolerance for emotional attachments to properties. He had made 3 extremely aggressive offers on my Maple Street Colonial in the past, constantly hovering like a vulture because of the property's proximity to the downtown tech sector. I had rejected him every single time. My fingers flew across the keyboard unaffected by the cold. To Thomas Vance, subject Maple Street property, immediate cash sale. Thomas, you've wanted the Maple Street Colonial for 2 years. It is yours. I am willing to sell the property fully furnished at a 20% discount below current market value. The conditions are non-negotiable. 1. It must be an all-cash transaction. 2. The closing paperwork must be signed and executed tomorrow morning. 3. You take immediate physical possession of the property the second the ink dries. The deed is held cleanly under my LLC. There are no liens, no marital claims, and no legal hurdles. Let me know if you are still hungry. Maya, I hit send. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, staring up at the yellow glow of the street lamp filtering through the frosted windshield. I could picture Marcus perfectly. He was probably laughing right now, submerged in the bubbling water of my hot tub, thoroughly enjoying the silence, believing he had successfully put me in my place. He thought I was cowering in a motel room learning to be compliant. Ping! The chime of an incoming email shattered the silence of the car. It had been less than 4 minutes. I pulled the laptop back onto my lap and opened the message. From Thomas Vance, subject R.E., Maple Street property, immediate cash sale. Maya. I've been eyeing that exact street for a new luxury portfolio block. A 20% discount for a fully furnished turnkey asset is the best news I've had all year. My legal team will have the contracts drafted by dawn. I will meet you at my attorney's office at 9 a.m. sharp with the cashier's check. We have a deal. A slow, dangerous smile finally curved my lips, the movement pulling at the dried tear tracks on my cheeks. I closed the laptop. The property was sold. By noon tomorrow, Marcus wouldn't just be dealing with an angry wife. He, Eleanor, and Chloe would be dealing with a corporate eviction team By 6 a.m., the heavy dose of antibiotics and prescription painkillers had dulled the fiery agony in my pelvis to a manageable rhythmic throb. The fever had broken, leaving my skin cool and clammy, but my mind was operating with the terrifying, hyper-focused precision of a predator. I walked into the polished glass and steel lobby of David's downtown law firm, with Aria strapped securely to my chest in a soft fabric wrap. Her steady, quiet breathing was the only tether keeping me grounded to the earth. David was already pacing the length of his corner office, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. He took one look at my pale, drawn face and the oversized coat swallowing my frame and silently pointed to the plush leather armchair across from his desk. I sank into it just as the heavy oak door swung open. Thomas Vance didn't do pleasantries. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 50s who moved with the aggressive energy of a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't offer his condolences for my situation, nor did he ask about the baby strapped to my chest. He simply dropped a sleek leather briefcase onto David's desk and popped the clasps. "The contracts are drawn precisely to your stipulations," Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Cash purchase. No contingencies regarding the interior condition or furnishings. I assume the liability for any cosmetic damage currently being inflicted upon the property. I close, I take possession, and the title transfers to my corporate holding group immediately." "And the funds?" David asked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the first page of the dense legal packet. "Sitting in an escrow account ready for immediate wire transfer," Vance replied smoothly. He turned his sharp, calculating gaze toward me. "However, I have one non-negotiable condition before I authorize the release of $2.4 million. I met his stare without blinking. "Name it." "I don't care if your in-laws are currently burning the furniture in the living room," Vance said flatly. "But I will not buy a structural liability. My general contractor and I need 15 minutes inside the house. I need to physically stand in the basement and verify the foundation is intact, and I need to check the main load-bearing walls. We do that and the money is yours by lunch." I glanced at the brass clock on David's desk. It was 6:45 a.m. Marcus, Eleanor, and Chloe were currently asleep in my home, likely hungover from their impromptu celebration. If I simply unlocked the door and walked in with a corporate investor, Marcus would immediately realize what was happening. He would physically block us, call the police to report an intrusion, or worse, use the ensuing chaos to stall the legal transfer. I needed them out of the house, completely, entirely gone, just long enough for Vance's contractor to sweep the bones of the property. "Give me 2 hours, I told Vance, pulling my laptop from my bag. "Have your contractor parked down the street by 8:30. Vance gave a single curt nod and stepped out of the office to make the call. I opened my laptop, tethered it to the firm's secure Wi-Fi, and went to work. If there was one thing I understood intimately about Eleanor and Chloe, it was their insatiable, bottomless vanity. They were obsessed with the perception of luxury, constantly grasping for experiences they couldn't afford on their own dimes. I quickly generated an untraceable burner email address. I pulled the logo from the Azure Spa and Resort, an ultra-exclusive, obscenely expensive wellness center located on the absolute opposite end of the city, and drafted a flawless, highly personalized promotional email. "Dear Eleanor and Chloe Blackwood, congratulations! You have been selected from our elite prospective client list to receive a complimentary VIP morning wellness package. This exclusive offer includes a 90-minute hot stone massage, a diamond infusion facial, and access to our private mimosa lounge. This promotional package is valid for today only. Please arrive by 8:15 a.m. to claim your complimentary services." I hit send, knowing with absolute certainty that Eleanor would check her phone the second she woke up. She would never under any circumstances turn down $3,000 worth of free high society pampering. But getting rid of Marcus required a different tactic. Marcus was lazy, but he was fiercely protective of his leased Audi sports car. I accessed a free SMS spoofing website and typed in his cell phone number. I set the sender ID to read as our neighborhood's strict homeowners association. Urgent HOA alert. Vehicle matching your license plate has been reported illegally parked near the community clubhouse. Towing enforcement has been dispatched. Immediate relocation required to avoid impound. I scheduled the text to deliver at 8 a.m., right when Eleanor and Chloe would be frantically rushing out the door. The clubhouse was a 20-minute walk from my driveway. By the time Marcus jogged down there, realized his car wasn't missing, and walked back, Vance would have all the time he needed. At 8:10 a.m., I was parked 3 houses down from my own property, hidden behind the tinted windows of David's black Range Rover. Vance and his contractor sat silently in the back seat. Right on cue, the front door of my house swung open. Eleanor and Chloe practically sprinted down the driveway dressed in matching designer athleisure wear, their faces glowing with greedy excitement. They climbed into Chloe's car and sped off toward the highway, chasing a phantom spa appointment. 7 minutes later, Marcus emerged. He was scowling at his phone, hurriedly throwing a jacket over his pajamas. He marched down the sidewalk, heading furiously in the direction of the community clubhouse, utterly oblivious to the black SUV idling in the shadows. "They're gone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We have 20 minutes. We moved quickly. I punched my master override code into the smart lock keypad. The mechanism whirred and the heavy oak door swung inward. The stench hit me first, a sickening cocktail of stale beer, spilled wine, and heavy, cheap perfume. My beautiful, meticulously curated foyer looked like a fraternity house after a weekend bender. Muddy shoe prints tracked across the imported Persian runner. Empty bottles littered the console table, but the ice in my veins held firm. I felt nothing for the mess. This house was no longer my home. It was simply a depreciating asset I was currently liquidating. "Basement," Vance ordered his contractor, pointing down the hall. "Move." While the 2 men descended the stairs to inspect the foundation, I stayed on the main floor, keeping Aria close to my chest. I needed my breast pump, my recovery medication, and a specific external hard drive containing my encrypted financial backups. I bypassed the desecrated nursery, entirely refusing to look at the tequila station they had built over my daughter's rug, and headed straight for the master suite. The bedroom was a disaster zone, but my medication was still in the master bath. I shoved the pill bottles into my bag and grabbed my breast pump from the vanity. My last stop was Marcus's home office, a small, heavily paneled room just off the master suite where I kept my fireproof safe. I stepped inside and closed the door. The room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of Marcus's stale coffee. I knelt beside the small safe under the window, punched in my combination, and retrieved my hard drive. As I stood up, adjusting Aria's weight in the wrap, my elbow brushed against the edge of Marcus's heavy mahogany desk. A thick, perfectly aligned stack of paperwork slid a few inches, catching the morning light filtering through the blinds. The logo at the very top of the page belonged to a predatory high-interest private lending firm. My brow furrowed. I reached out and pulled the top packet toward me. It was a commercial loan application. Specifically, a cash-out refinance application, a second mortgage. I scanned the first page, my blood turning to liquid nitrogen as I read the property address. It was my house. The house owned exclusively by my LLC. Marcus was attempting to pull $400,000 of cash equity out of the property, but it was the third page that made the room spin. There, on the final authorization line of the loan application, was a signature in blue ink. It was my signature. Every loop, every slant, every perfectly practiced curve of my name. It was an absolutely flawless forgery. I stood in the stifling warmth of Marcus's home office, my eyes locked on the blue ink that mirrored my own handwriting with terrifying precision. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together, forming a picture of betrayal so profound it momentarily robbed me of breath. This wasn't just about Eleanor throwing a temper tantrum or wanting a luxurious free vacation. The changed deadbolts, the drained joint checking accounts, the sudden unannounced arrival of my in-laws, it was a highly coordinated, calculated siege. Marcus needed me out of the house and utterly distracted by sheer survival so he could push through a $400,000 cash-out refinance. And given Chloe's notorious out-of-control shopping habits and Eleanor's desperate pathological need to maintain the illusion of generational wealth, I knew exactly where that stolen equity was destined to go. I folded the forged application, carefully sliding it into the deep interior pocket of my wool coat. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a loaded weapon. I grabbed the external hard drive containing my business backups, shoved my recovery medications into my bag, and slipped silently out of the office. Down the hallway, I could hear Vance's heavy footsteps ascending the basement stairs. "Foundation is solid," the contractor's muffled voice echoed from the kitchen. "No moisture, no cracking along the load-bearing beams. The bones are perfect." "Good," Vance replied. I met them in the foyer, my face a mask of absolute impenetrable calm. I adjusted the fabric wrap holding my sleeping daughter against my chest. "Have you seen enough?" Vance looked around the trashed entryway, his lip curling in visible distaste at the sticky cocktail spills and muddy footprints ruining the imported Persian runner. "More than enough. Let's go sign." We drove back to David's downtown office in silence. The winter sun was fully up now, casting long, sharp shadows across the frost-covered skyscrapers. Inside the polished boardroom, David had the expedited transfer documents waiting in a pristine, perfectly aligned stack. Before we began, I handed David the forged loan application. He took one look at it, his jaw tightening as he recognized the fraudulent signature and the predatory lender's letterhead. He didn't ask questions. He simply gave a sharp, validating nod and placed it into a secure, red-tabbed folder. It was the ultimate leverage for the impending divorce, a permanent guarantee that Marcus would walk away from our marriage with absolutely nothing but criminal liability. Vance sat across from me, a heavy silver pen resting in his large hand. He didn't waste time reading the fine print. His fleet of corporate lawyers had already scrutinized every syllable before we even arrived. He signed the paperwork with rapid, aggressive strokes, pushing the thick stack across the polished mahogany table. I took the pen next. With every initial, every date, every signature, I severed a phantom limb. The house I had painstakingly designed, the delicate birch forest mural I had painted in the nursery, the custom hardwood floors I had paced while heavily pregnant, I signed it all away without a single ounce of hesitation. I didn't feel loss. I felt the exhilarating, breathless rush of shedding a massive, suffocating weight. "Wire initiated," Vance stated flatly, tapping the screen of his phone. "It should hit your private account in 3 minutes." David confirmed the receipt of the digital transfer shortly after. $2.4 million cleared and secured in a heavily encrypted standalone account that Marcus couldn't even dream of accessing. I left David's office a remarkably wealthy, dangerously liberated woman. The dingy, yellow-lit motel room was no longer my reality. Sitting in the heated leather seat of my SUV, I opened a luxury real estate app. I didn't want another house in the suburbs. I didn't want neighbors, and I certainly didn't want a ground floor entrance. I wanted altitude. I wanted absolute, unbreachable security. I wanted a fortress. Within 45 minutes, I had leased a sprawling, fully furnished penthouse on the 34th floor of an ultra-modern high-rise in the city's financial district. The building required biometric key fob access, for the elevators possessed a 24-hour concierge, and boasted a private security team composed entirely of ex-military personnel. It was a place where Marcus's entitled aggressive bullying would get him pinned to the marble floor in seconds. My next stop was an upscale boutique baby store. Moving through the pristine aisles with ruthless efficiency, I purchased everything Aria needed and more. I bought a top-of-the-line smart bassinet, imported organic cotton swaddles, a high-tech video monitoring system, glass bottles, and a mountain of premium infant formula. I swiped my new exclusive bank card without glancing at the total. My daughter was never going to sleep in a car seat on a scuffed motel desk ever again. By mid-afternoon, the concierge team at the high-rise was helping me unload my SUV. They brought everything up to the penthouse, their hushed, respectful tones a stark contrast to the blatant disrespect I had endured for the past 48 hours. The apartment was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, uninterrupted sweep of the icy city skyline and the dark, churning waters of the harbor beyond. The furnishings were sleek minimalist and utterly untouched by the sticky, chaotic taint of my in-laws. The air smelled of expensive citrus diffusers, entirely erasing the memory of stale beer and cheap tequila. I set up Aria's new bassinet in the center of the massive master bedroom. The mattress was thick and pristine. I gently unswaddled her, changed her diaper, and laid her down on the crisp white sheets. She stretched her tiny arms, letting out a soft, contented sigh before drifting instantly back to sleep. For the first time since Marcus had locked the deadbolt on my old life, I let out a breath that didn't rattle in my chest. The searing pain in my abdomen had subsided to a dull ache, effectively managed by the proper antibiotics and prescription painkillers I had retrieved from the house. I took a hot, steaming shower in a bathroom, encased in dark Italian marble, washing away the smell of the motel, the hospital clinic, and the sheer terror of the night before. I changed into a set of plush, oversized cashmere loungewear I had bought on a whim. I walked into the sprawling living room and poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water. I stood by the massive windows looking down at the city far below. The cars moved like tiny, silent insects through the geometric grid of the streets. Somewhere out there, Marcus was likely pacing the hardwood floors of Maple Street, furiously trying to figure out why his HOA towing alert had been a false alarm. Eleanor and Chloe were probably enraged, demanding to speak to a manager at a luxury spa that had absolutely no record of their VIP appointments. They were returning to a house they believed they had conquered, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were trespassing. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. My phone vibrated against the sleek quartz countertop of the kitchen island. I picked it up. It was a text message from an unsaved number. Thomas Vance. The deed is officially recorded with the county. My management team is heading over now with a locksmith and immediate eviction notices. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the sleek, silent ambiance of my penthouse, creating a surreal contrast to the absolute devastation I was about to unleash. Thomas Vance's text message was the starting gun. The bureaucratic gears of the county clerk's office had finally finished turning, making today day 5 of my in-laws' stolen vacation the official end of their delusion. I set my phone down on the pristine quartz countertop and walked over to my laptop. Opening a specialized application, I activated the live audio feed from the discreet two-way smart monitor I had hidden behind a row of antique books on the living room mantel months ago. Originally, it was just a way for me to listen out for Aria while I worked in the kitchen, but today it was my front-row ticket to the execution. The audio feed crackled to life, instantly filling my quiet sanctuary with the loud, obnoxious sounds of stolen luxury. Out on the back patio, Marcus was blasting a curated jazz playlist through the outdoor surround sound system I had painstakingly installed last summer. I could hear the sharp, hissing sizzle of expensive steaks hitting the searing iron of my imported grill, the clinking of crystal wine glasses. My crystal wine glasses, a wedding gift from my late aunt, rang out over the dull roar of overlapping conversations. Eleanor was in her absolute element. She had invited a half dozen of her high society friends over for a lavish midday barbecue, undoubtedly funded entirely by Marcus's rapidly maxing credit cards. Oh yes, the landscaping is just divine this time of year. Eleanor's shrill, performative voice echoed through the microphone, dripping with unearned pride. Marcus has such an eye for property. He works so hard to provide this level of comfort for us. We just had to come up and break in the new patio furniture. It's stunning, Eleanor, a woman with a raspy, smoked-out voice replied. Though I'm surprised Maya isn't here hosting with you. Where did you say she went? Oh, Maya. Eleanor sighed, her tone adopting a sickly sweet patronizing cadence. She's taking a little mental health retreat. The postpartum period has been quite overwhelming for her, poor thing. She just couldn't handle the responsibilities of managing a household of this caliber. Marcus, bless his heart, suggested she take some time away to recalibrate while we step in to keep things running smoothly. I leaned against the kitchen island, a cold, detached smile spreading across my face. She was spinning a narrative of my mental instability to cover up the fact that her son had locked his bleeding wife and newborn daughter out in the freezing cold. Marcus is such a saint, another woman chimed in. To juggle his investments and take care of everything here. Well, he's about to finalize a massive expansion of his portfolio. Marcus interjected, his voice booming over the music as he stepped closer to the open patio doors. He was actively bragging about the second mortgage, the cash-out refinance he was trying to secure using my forged signature. Big moves happening next week, ladies. You have to spend money to make money, right? The sycophantic laughter of Eleanor's friends filled the air. Chloe's voice whined in the background about the brand of tequila Marcus had purchased for her margarita station, complaining it wasn't the premium label she had requested. They were utterly intoxicated by their own perceived power, completely oblivious to the shadow falling over the driveway. Then the ambient noise of the suburban afternoon shifted. The heavy, unmistakable crunch of thick commercial tires rolling over the gravel driveway bled through the audio feed. It wasn't just one vehicle. It was the synchronized, aggressive rumble of a fleet of heavy-duty vans. The mindless chatter on the patio faltered. The clinking of glasses ceased. Marcus, are you expecting a delivery? Eleanor asked, her voice losing a fraction of its pompous lilt. No, Marcus muttered. The heavy slide of the patio doors echoed as he stepped inside the living room, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood. Hey, you can't park those there. The driveway is private property. I turned the volume up on my laptop. The sound of heavy militant footsteps approached the front door, followed by the metallic click of a master key sliding into the newly replaced deadbolt. Marcus had changed the locks, but Thomas Vance's corporate eviction team didn't need permission to bypass them. They had the legal authority to drill them out if necessary, but the locksmith had apparently handled it with terrifying speed. The front door swung open with a heavy thud. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with sudden, genuine panic. "Get out of my house before I call the police." "Are you Marcus Blackwood?" a voice demanded. It was a crisp, mechanical baritone utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man who evicted people for a living and felt nothing but the ticking clock of his billable hours. "Yes, I'm Marcus Blackwood, and you are trespassing on my property. I want you and your security goons out of here right now." "I am the regional property manager for Apex Holdings," the man stated coldly. "We are accompanied by 2 armed private security contractors to ensure a smooth transition of assets. This property does not belong to you. You are currently trespassing on a corporate job site." Out on the patio, the music abruptly cut out. Eleanor and her friends had gone dead silent. "You're out of your mind," Marcus scoffed, though the bravado in his voice was beginning to tremble. "My wife and I own this home. You have the wrong address, pal." There was a sharp, heavy slap of a thick manila folder hitting Marcus's chest. "The deed of sale was recorded with the county clerk at 9 a.m. this morning. the property manager announced, projecting his voice so it echoed clearly through the open patio doors for every single one of Eleanor's high society friends to hear. The property was sold for cash by the sole legal owner of the LLC holding the deed. You possess zero equity, zero legal standing, and zero tenancy rights. You are legally classified as an unauthorized squatter. Sold! Eleanor shrieked, her footsteps frantically tapping against the floorboards as she rushed inside. What do you mean sold, Marcus? What is he talking about? This is a mistake, Marcus shouted, his voice jumping an octave into pure panic. Maya can't sell the house. We're married. I have rights. I have a loan application processing on this property right now. Your marital disputes and fraudulent loan applications are not the concern of Apex Holdings, the property manager replied smoothly, striking a brutal public blow to Marcus's ego. You are holding a 24-hour notice to vacate. You have exactly until this time tomorrow to remove your personal effects. Our security team will remain stationed in the driveway to ensure no fixtures, appliances, or architectural elements are damaged or removed. Squatters! One of Eleanor's friends gasped loudly from the patio. Eleanor, I thought you said Marcus owned this estate. He does. He does. Eleanor stammered, her voice breathless and hyperventilating. Susan, please, it's just a clerical error, a misunderstanding. If you are still on the premises when the 24-hour window expires, the manager continued, his voice slicing right through Eleanor's pathetic attempts to save face. The locks will be permanently altered. You will be physically removed by law enforcement for criminal trespassing, and any remaining items will be incinerated at an off-site facility. Do you understand these terms, Mr. Blackwood? I'm calling the police! Chloe screamed from the background. You can't do this! I have clothes in my room! Feel free to call local law enforcement, ma'am, the manager said dryly. They have already been provided with the recorded deed and the eviction notice. They will tell you exactly what I just did. You have 23 hours and 56 minutes. I suggest you start packing. The heavy militant footsteps retreated toward the front door. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed like a gunshot through the house. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my sparkling water. The absolute destruction of their social standing had been broadcast live to the exact audience Eleanor cared about most. The illusion was dead. The fortress they thought they had stolen had just collapsed on top of them. Through the monitor, the aftermath was pure, unadulterated chaos. Eleanor's friends were making hasty, embarrassed excuses, their heels clicking rapidly as they fled the patio, eager to escape the humiliating stench of the eviction. Eleanor was sobbing hysterically, begging them not to leave, while Chloe threw what sounded like a glass vase against the wall. Marcus, do something! Eleanor wailed, her voice cracking. They think we're homeless. Susan is going to tell everyone at the club. Fix this. Shut up, just shut up, Marcus roared, the sound of his heavy breathing filling the microphone. Seconds later, my cell phone vibrated violently against the quartz countertop. Marcus's face flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the moment before I calmly swiped a finger across the glass and lifted the phone to my ear. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice as cool and smooth as the marble floors of my penthouse. A panicked, hyperventilating Marcus frantically dialed my number, screaming into the phone, "What the hell did you just do? What the hell did you just do?" Marcus's voice tore through the receiver so loud and frantic that I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the cool liquid soothe my dry throat as I stared out at the sprawling, icy metropolis far below my penthouse windows. I liquidated a depreciating personal asset. I replied, my tone as flat and unbothered as a corporate automated message. As permitted under the terms of the LLC operating agreement, You sold the house! He screamed, his voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. It was a raw, primal sound of total loss of control. You can't sell the house. I live here. My family is here. Tell these armed psychos to get out of my driveway right now. Maya, fix this. Through the phone's audio and the live feed still broadcasting from my laptop, the symphony of their absolute ruin played in glorious surround sound. I could hear the high-pitched mechanical whine of a heavy-duty power drill. The property manager wasn't waiting for them to leave. His crew was already boring out the brass locks on the front door to replace the hardware. "Maya, answer me!" Marcus bellowed. I didn't answer him immediately. I simply listened to the background noise. Eleanor was sobbing hysterically, her voice carrying from the patio. "Susan, please don't leave. It's a mistake. I promise you Marcus is handling it." Eleanor pleaded, her tone stripped of all its usual aristocratic arrogance, reduced to a desperate, pathetic whine. "I really must be going, Eleanor," the raspy voice of her high society friend replied, clipped and icy with embarrassment. "My husband expects me for an early dinner. Good luck with all of this." The heavy, unmistakable thud of a luxury car door slamming shut echoed through the receiver, followed by the purr of a Mercedes engine speeding down the driveway. The ultimate social humiliation had been achieved. Eleanor's carefully curated illusion of generational wealth and untouchable status had just been publicly executed in front of the very women she desperately sought to impress. "You're ruining my mother's party!" Chloe screeched from somewhere near the kitchen. "Tell them to stop drilling. The noise is giving me a migraine." "Maya!" Marcus yelled again, banging his fist against something solid, likely the kitchen island. "You call this company right now and reverse the sale. You had no right to do this without consulting me. I'm your husband. I have marital rights to this property." I walked over to the plush velvet sofa and sat down, crossing my legs. "You have zero rights to that property, Marcus. You seem to be forgetting the ironclad prenuptial agreement your mother practically shoved down my throat the week before our wedding, the one that specifically isolated all premarital assets and subsequent businesses in my name. You insisted I sign it to prove I wasn't a gold digger, remember?" There was a brief stuttering pause on his end, as the legal reality collided with his entitlement. He had been so arrogant, so convinced of his dominance, that he had entirely forgotten the legal shield his own mother had built to protect him from me. "That doesn't matter," he snapped, pivoting instantly to aggression. "You can't just evict us without notice. It's illegal. I'll call the police." "The police have the recorded deed and the eviction notice on file," I reminded him smoothly. "Apex Holdings owns the dirt you're standing on. You have 23 hours and 50 minutes left to vacate the premises before their security contractors physically toss you and your mother's patio furniture onto the sidewalk." "You vindictive, crazy bitch!" He spat, his voice dropping into a low, menacing growl. The mask was completely off now. The lazy, indifferent husband had vanished, replaced by a cornered, vicious predator. "You think you're so smart? You think you can just pull the rug out from under me and walk away with millions? I'll sue you. I will drag you through divorce court so hard you'll be bleeding legal fees for the next decade. I'll freeze your accounts. I'll take half of that money and I'll ruin your pathetic little design business." I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that no one was in the room to see. "You aren't going to sue me, Marcus," I said softly. "You aren't going to hire a lawyer, you aren't going to contest the divorce, and you aren't going to come after a single dime of my money." "Watch me," he threatened. "I don't need to watch you," I replied. "I just need to look at the paperwork you left sitting on your mahogany desk, specifically the commercial loan application for a $400,000 cash-out refinance on a property you do not own." The dead silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Even the background noise of Eleanor crying seemed to suddenly mute as Marcus stopped breathing. "Predatory high-interest private lenders require extensive verification," I continued, keeping my voice light, almost conversational. Which makes it incredibly stupid to forge your wife's signature in blue ink on the final authorization page. Every loop, every slant, every perfectly practiced curve of my name. It was an impressive effort, Marcus, truly. But it's still a felony. I could hear the shallow, rapid hitches of his breath. I have the physical original documents secured in my attorney's red-tabbed vault, I stated, twisting the knife. I have digital scans backed up on 3 separate encrypted servers. You committed mortgage fraud and identity theft. The moment you try to stall this divorce, the moment you ask for a single penny in alimony, or the moment you even think about challenging my full custody of Aria, I will hand that folder over to the district attorney. Maya, he choked out. The aggression had instantly evaporated, replaced by the hollow, trembling tone of a man realizing he was staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. Maya, wait. Listen to me, please. You locked me out in the freezing cold while I was bleeding, Marcus. I whispered, the memory of the ice on my bare feet fueling the absolute zero temperature in my voice. You let your mother steal my daughter's bed. You don't get to negotiate anymore. Let's just talk about this like adults. He stammered, his voice rising in panic. We can fix this. I was stressed. My mother was pressuring me about money and I made a stupid mistake. Maya, you can't destroy my life over a mistake. Your life was destroyed the second you changed the deadbolt, I told him. Get out of my house. Marcus, what is she saying? Eleanor's voice suddenly pierced through the phone. She had evidently realized her son was faltering. The property manager's drill was still whining in the background, a relentless reminder of their impending doom. Why are you begging her? Tell her to wire us the money. Mom, stop. Just let me handle this, Marcus pleaded, but there was a sudden scuffle. Give me the phone, Eleanor shrieked. I heard the clatter of the device being snatched from Marcus's grip. Listen to me, you ungrateful little tramp, Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic, unhinged fury. You are not going to humiliate this family. You are going to call those security thugs off right now, and you are going to transfer the funds from that sale into Marcus's account immediately. Or what, Eleanor? I asked, completely unfazed by her venom. You'll ruin my reputation at the country club. I will ruin your life, she screamed, her breath hitching with manic desperation. The realization that she couldn't access my money had driven her to a state of absolute vicious madness. If she couldn't control my finances, she would attack the only thing I had left to lose. You think you're so untouchable because you have some cash? Eleanor snarled, her voice dropping to a demonic whisper. You have no home. You have no husband. You're recovering from surgery, and you are clearly suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. I am calling Child Protective Services the second I hang up this phone. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. I am going to tell them you are a homeless, unfit mother who is endangering a newborn, she shrieked, the triumphant malice bleeding through the speaker. They will take Aria away from you before the sun goes down, Maya. Do you hear me? I will have my granddaughter ripped right out of your arms. I didn't blink. The vicious, unhinged venom in Eleanor's voice was meant to shatter me, to trigger the familiar, submissive panic she had relied on for the entirety of my marriage to her son. But the woman she was trying to terrorize no longer existed. Please, Eleanor, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, even pitch. Make the call. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She hadn't expected permission. Give Child Protective Services the address of the 34th floor multi-million-dollar penthouse I am currently leasing. I continued pacing slowly across the dark Italian marble of my new living room. Tell them to bypass my 24-hour private armed security detail. Invite them to inspect the brand new top-of-the-line bassinet my daughter is currently sleeping in, and the thousands of dollars in premium infant formula sitting in my custom pantry. Tell them about my fully funded 7-figure standalone bank account. The silence on the line was deafening. I let it stretch, ensuring the absolute reality of my invulnerability suffocated her. Then, I whispered, the ice in my voice crystallizing. When the social workers are finished marveling at my impeccable safe environment, I will kindly direct them to Maple Street. I will let them evaluate the squalid, alcohol-soaked fraternity house you are currently occupying. I will show them the police reports of my husband locking his bleeding, freshly postpartum wife out in the freezing cold. I will show them the forged federal loan documents. So I beg you, Eleanor, pick up the other line and dial. I didn't wait for her to stammer a reply. I ended the call immediately, blocking Marcus, Eleanor, and Chloe's numbers from my phone. I tossed the device onto the plush sofa, walked into the master bedroom, and lay down next to Aria's bassinet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I closed my eyes and slept in absolute, unbroken peace. The next morning dawned bright, crisp, and bitterly cold. I woke up naturally to the soft, gentle cooing of my daughter. The penthouse was flooded with brilliant winter sunlight. I took my time feeding Aria, savoring the quiet warmth of our new sanctuary, before making myself a cup of rich espresso. Once I was settled at the kitchen island, I opened my laptop and reconnected to the hidden audio monitor left on the mantel of my former home. It was 8:30 a.m. They had 30 minutes left on their 24-hour notice to vacate. Through the laptop speakers, I could hear the clinking of coffee mugs and the unmistakable sound of sheer, stubborn delusion. They hadn't packed a single box. "She's bluffing." Eleanor's voice echoed, haughty and dripping with arrogant dismissal. "It's a scare tactic, Marcus. She probably hired some actors to come over here yesterday in those ridiculous suits. A wife cannot simply sell a marital home out from under her husband. It violates every decency of the law." "I told you, Mom, the deed was in her LLC," Marcus muttered, though he sounded less confident than he had the day before. "But you're right. Even if she did, the eviction process takes months. The courts are backed up. They can't just throw us out on the street. We have squatters' rights. We have mail delivered here." "Exactly," Chloe chimed in, the sound of her filing her nails bleeding through the mic. "I'm not leaving. I have a Zoom date with my personal trainer at 10. If those goons come back, just ignore the door." They genuinely believed their entitlement was a shield against corporate law. They thought they could stage a comfortable, arrogant sit-in on a leather sectional they hadn't paid for inside a house they didn't own, and that the world would simply bend to their will. I closed my laptop, strapped Aria securely into her car seat, and grabbed my keys. I wasn't going to miss this. By 8:50 a.m., my tinted SUV was parked discreetly down the street from my former home, tucked neatly behind a massive oak tree. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the pristine manicured lawns covered in a thick layer of morning frost. At exactly 8:58 a.m., the silence was shattered. It wasn't just the black corporate vans from the day before. 3 local sheriff's cruisers turned the corner, their lights flashing in brilliant, blinding strobes of red and blue against the white frost. They pulled aggressively into the driveway, boxing in Marcus's leased Audi and Chloe's sedan. 4 heavily armed deputies stepped out, their boots crunching loudly on the gravel, followed closely by Thomas Vance's property manager and his private security contractors. Doors up and down the street began to open. Neighbors, the very same people Eleanor had spent years trying to impress with her fabricated wealth, stepped out onto their porches, clutching their morning coffee, their eyes wide with scandalous curiosity. I watched through the tinted glass of my windshield, entirely invisible, as the deputies marched up the front steps and began pounding on the door. Through the earpiece synced to the hidden living room monitor, the audio feed exploded into sheer panic. "Marcus, don't answer it!" Eleanor shrieked. "Police department!" A booming voice yelled from outside, followed by the heavy metallic sound of a master key turning in the lock. Apex Holdings wasn't waiting for an invitation. The front door swung open. "Hey, you can't just barge in here," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with terror. "We live here. We have rights. Marcus Blackwood, the lead deputy, demanded, his voice carrying clearly both over the earpiece and through the crisp morning air outside. You were served a legal 24-hour notice to vacate a corporate job site. Your time expired at 9 a.m. You are currently committing criminal trespassing. We are not leaving, Eleanor cried out, her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. This is my son's house. We are decent people. Ma'am, I don't care if you're the Queen of England, the deputy snapped, entirely devoid of patience for her suburban theatrics. The property belongs to Apex Holdings. You have exactly 5 minutes to grab whatever personal belongings you can physically carry, or you will be placed in handcuffs and removed by force. Move. My clothes! Chloe shrieked, the sound of her frantic footsteps pounding up the stairs. My bags, I can't pack in 5 minutes. 4 minutes and 50 seconds, the deputy replied coldly. What followed was a symphony of ultimate unmitigated humiliation. I watched from the warmth of my SUV as the front door was propped open by the armed security guards. First came Chloe, sobbing uncontrollably, dragging 2 overstuffed, unzipped Louis Vuitton suitcases down the front steps. A trail of expensive cosmetics and tangled designer clothing spilled out onto the frosted concrete behind her. Then came Eleanor. Her perfectly coiffed hair was a wild, disheveled mess. She was clutching a handful of winter coats, her face buried in the collar of a mink jacket, as she practically stumbled down the driveway. She couldn't hide, though. Mrs. Gable from next door was standing at the edge of her property line, openly recording the entire spectacle on her iPad. The illusion of the mighty Blackwood dynasty was burning to the ground in front of the entire zip code. Finally, Marcus was frog-marched out the front door, flanked by 2 armed deputies. He was gripping a cardboard box full of tangled laptop cords and loose papers, his face flushed a deep mottled purple. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked exactly like the pathetic, entitled fraud he had always been. Do not return to this address, the lead deputy announced loudly from the porch, making sure the gathering crowd of neighbors heard every single syllable. If your vehicles are not removed from the property line in the next 10 minutes, they will be towed and impounded at your expense. Marcus dumped his cardboard box onto the curb next to the street drain. He stood shivering in the biting winter wind, wearing only a thin sweater and pajama pants, staring up at the house he had tried to steal from me. The heavy commercial-grade deadbolts were already being drilled out and replaced by Vance's crew. It was over. They were locked out, stranded on the freezing asphalt with nothing but the luggage at their feet. Suddenly, Marcus's cell phone rang. The sharp, trilling ringtone echoed over the quiet street. He fumbled frantically in his pockets, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He swiped to answer, bringing the phone to his ear. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but through the directional microphone in my earpiece, I could hear Marcus's response. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Marcus stammered, his voice dropping into a breathless, terrified whisper. Yes, I know I was supposed to log in this morning, but I've had a family emergency. There was a pause. Marcus's face drained of all remaining color, turning a sickly ashen gray. What do you mean, irregular? Marcus choked out, his eyes darting wildly around the empty street. I didn't alter any invoices. Sir, please, if you just let me come in and explain the corporate expense accounts. I listened through the earpiece, savoring the trembling, pathetic whimpers of a man whose entire universe was vaporizing in real time. Mr. Sterling wasn't interested in Marcus's excuses. I knew exactly what Sterling was looking at on his computer screen because I was the one who had anonymously couriered the heavily encrypted flash drive to his office 2 days prior. It contained a masterclass in forensic accounting. I had spent countless sleepless nights tracking the microscopic, systematic redirection of funds from Marcus's corporate accounts into his personal checking. The dossier detailed every fraudulent expense, every padded invoice, and every phantom client dinner. I can pay it back, Marcus pleaded into the phone, his voice echoing across the frosted suburban street. "Mr. Sterling, please, I just needed to float some cash for my mother's—" The line went dead. Marcus slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the black screen. "Marcus." Eleanor prodded her manicured hands, clutching a garbage bag stuffed with designer shoes. "What did he say? Are they going to advance your bonus?" Marcus dropped his phone onto the asphalt. It hit the ground with a sharp crack, the screen splintering into a spiderweb of broken glass. He fell to his knees right there on the curb, burying his face in his hands, oblivious to the stares of the neighbors and the indifferent presence of the armed security contractors swapping out the locks on the front door. I rolled up the tinted window of my SUV, put the vehicle in drive, and quietly slipped out of the neighborhood. The appetizer was finished. It was time for the main course. 72 hours later, the grand theater of my revenge shifted to the sterile wood-paneled confines of family court. The emergency hearings for divorce and custody had been fast-tracked, propelled by the mountain of undeniable explosive evidence Thomas Vance had submitted on my behalf. I sat at the petitioner's table dressed in a sharp-tailored ivory suit, projecting an aura of absolute unbothered calm. Across the aisle, Marcus looked like a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant predator who had tormented me. He wore a wrinkled suit that looked like it had been slept in, which it likely had, considering he, Eleanor, and Chloe had been forced to cram into a 2-star motel by the interstate. His accounts were frozen, his credit was decimated, and he was being represented by a cheap bargain bin attorney who looked entirely out of his depth. The Honorable Judge Harrison, a stern, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance, peered over her reading glasses at the thick binder of evidence Thomas had placed before her. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Harrison began, her voice slicing through the quiet courtroom like a scalpel, "I have reviewed the petitioner's exhibits. I am looking at time-stamped text messages verified by your cellular provider in which you explicitly instruct your wife, who was less than a week postpartum and actively bleeding, to go find a motel while you change the locks on her home." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Your Honor, it was a heated argument. I didn't actually think she would—" "You didn't think she would what?" The judge interrupted, her tone dropping in temperature. "Bleed out in the snow. I also have the receipts from the motel she was forced to walk to in the dead of night carrying your newborn daughter. The sheer cruelty of this action is staggering." Marcus shrank into his chair, unable to meet the judge's gaze. But Thomas wasn't finished. "We weren't just here for a scolding, we were here for a total dismantling. Your Honor, if I may direct your attention to Exhibit D," Thomas said smoothly, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "We have uncovered evidence of severe financial abuse and attempted fraud. My client's husband attempted to secure a $400,000 cash-out refinance on a property that belonged exclusively to my client's LLC. He did so by forging her signature." Thomas handed a secondary file to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "We have provided sworn statements from a forensic handwriting analyst." Thomas continued, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "We have also included the internal audit from Mr. Blackwood's former employer, confirming that he embezzled over $80,000 in corporate funds to sustain his family's lifestyle. A lifestyle that included luxury spa retreats for his mother, Eleanor Blackwood, and $10,000 shopping sprees for his sister, Chloe." A collective gasp echoed from the gallery where Eleanor and Chloe had foolishly decided to sit. I didn't turn around to look at them, but I could feel the heat of Eleanor's absolute mortification burning into the back of my neck. Family court records were public. The journalists sitting in the back row were already furiously typing on their laptops. The parasitic, blood-sucking nature of my in-laws was now permanently etched into the public record. "Is this accurate, Mr. Blackwood?" Judge Harrison asked, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Marcus's cheap lawyer attempted to stand. "Your Honor, my client's financial difficulties are a separate matter. Sit down, counselor, the judge snapped. She turned her glacial glare back to Marcus. You endangered the life of a newborn. You abandoned your wife during a medical crisis to appease your mother and sister, funding their exorbitant vanity with stolen money and attempted mortgage fraud. You are a profound danger to the physical and financial well-being of this child. The ruling was swift, merciless, and absolute. I was granted immediate sole legal and physical custody of Aria. Marcus was stripped of all visitation rights, pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation and the conclusion of the criminal investigations surrounding his embezzlement. He was ordered to pay my legal fees, an impossible task, given his current insolvency, and a permanent restraining order was issued barring him, Eleanor and Chloe, from coming within 500 yards of me, my daughter, or my businesses. As the bailiff dismissed the court, I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. I finally turned to look at the gallery. Eleanor was hyperventilating, clutching her pearls as she stared at the reporters who were already rushing out to file their stories. The social fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic for the Blackwood women. By the time I arrived back at my penthouse, the local society blogs had published the sordid details of the hearing. Eleanor's pristine, carefully manufactured reputation disintegrated overnight. The country club immediately revoked her membership, citing the embezzlement scandal. The wealthy women she had spent decades sycophantically trailing after instantly severed all contact, blocking her number and uninviting her from the upcoming spring galas. Chloe was dropped by her high-end modeling agency before dinner. They were social pariahs, bankrupt, disgraced, and exiled to a cheap motel smelling of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The mighty fortress of their entitlement had collapsed, burying them in the rubble of their own greed. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city glittered below me, a vast ocean of light. Aria was sleeping soundly in the nursery, watched over by a highly recommended night nurse. My business was thriving, my bank accounts were overflowing, and the toxic infection that had plagued my life had been surgically excised. It was a quiet, perfect evening. Then the private secured elevator that opened directly into my personal foyer chimed. I froze my wine glass, pausing halfway to my lips. That elevator required a biometric scan and a coded keycard from the ground floor concierge. No one was supposed to be coming up. My night nurse was already here, and I hadn't ordered any deliveries. I set my glass down on the quartz counter, my heart giving a sudden sharp thump against my ribs. I moved silently toward the kitchen island, pulling open the top drawer to grasp the heavy cold steel of the chef's knife resting inside. The heavy oak doors of the elevator hissed open. Maya! The voice was a ragged, desperate croak. I stepped out from behind the kitchen wall, gripping the knife down by my side. Marcus was kneeling on the imported Italian marble of my private foyer. He looked feral. His clothes were stained, his hair was matted with sweat and rain, and his eyes were wide, bloodshot pools of absolute mania. He had somehow slipped past the lobby security, likely tailgating a resident or exploiting a shift change, and bypassed the elevator locks with a desperation that bordered on terrifying. Maya, please, he sobbed, his voice echoing in the cavernous, quiet space of the penthouse. He crawled forward on his knees, his hands clasped together in front of his chest, like a man praying to a merciless God. They took everything. My mom kicked me out of the motel. The police are looking for me for the corporate funds. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. Please, Maya, you won. You won. Just let me see my daughter. The phone call Marcus received as he stood shivering on the frosty curb was merely the opening salvo in a war he was entirely unequipped to fight. I didn't just officially file for divorce and sole custody that morning. I dropped a tactical nuclear weapon on the entire Blackwood family. Thomas Vance, moving with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned apex predator, submitted a mountain of undeniable, catastrophic evidence to the county family court. The fallout was rapid, public, and absolutely merciless. 48 hours after the eviction, Marcus's dirty laundry was dragged out of the shadows and strung up under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the courtroom. I sat at the petitioner's table in a tailored ivory suit, projecting an aura of calm, impenetrable armor. Across the aisle, Marcus looked like a cornered, panicked animal. His accounts had been frozen by an emergency injunction forcing him to hire a bargain bin attorney who looked visibly pale as he reviewed the stack of our submitted exhibits. The Honorable Judge Harrison, a magistrate notorious for her zero-tolerance policy toward domestic and financial abuse, peered over her thick reading glasses at the expansive binder resting on her bench. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge began, her voice slicing through the dead silence of the courtroom like a scalpel. "I am reviewing a series of time-stamped text messages verified by your cellular provider. In these messages, you explicitly instruct your wife, who was less than a week postpartum and actively bleeding from a medical complication, to, and I quote, go find a motel while you illegally altered the locks on her legal residence." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his slightly wrinkled collar. "Your Honor, it was a highly stressful week. We had a heated argument and I didn't actually think she would—" "You didn't think she would what?" Judge Harrison interrupted, the temperature in the room plummeting. "Bleed out in the snow, freeze to death with your newborn daughter. I am also looking at the receipts from the roadside motel she was forced to walk to in the dead of night. The sheer unmitigated cruelty of this action is staggering, Mr. Blackwood." Marcus shrank into his heavy wooden chair, unable to meet the judge's piercing gaze. But Thomas Vance wasn't finished. "We weren't just there for a judicial scolding. We were there for a total systemic dismantling." "Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to Exhibit D," Thomas said smoothly, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. "We have uncovered evidence of severe financial abuse and attempted fraud. My client's husband attempted to secure a $400,000 cash-out refinance on a property that belonged exclusively to my client's LLC. He did so by brazenly forging her signature." Thomas handed a secondary red-tabbed file to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "We have provided sworn affidavits from a forensic handwriting analyst," Thomas continued, his voice ringing with absolute damning authority. "We have also included the internal audit from Mr. Blackwood's former employer. This audit confirms that he embezzled over $80,000 in corporate funds to sustain his family's extravagant lifestyle. A lifestyle that included luxury spa retreats for his mother, Eleanor Blackwood, and five-figure designer shopping sprees for his sister, Chloe." A collective gasp echoed from the gallery. I didn't turn around to look, but I knew Eleanor and Chloe were sitting 3 rows back. I could practically feel the heat of Eleanor's absolute mortification burning into the back of my neck. Family court records were public, and because the spectacular eviction had already sparked fierce neighborhood gossip, several local journalists had quietly slipped into the back benches. The parasitic, blood-sucking nature of my in-laws was now permanently etched into the public record. Marcus's cheap lawyer attempted to stand, his voice wavering. "Your Honor, my client's separate financial difficulties are irrelevant to the custody." "Sit down, counselor," the judge snapped, slamming her hand flat against the desk. She turned her glacial glare back to Marcus. "You endangered the life of a fragile newborn. You abandoned your wife during a medical crisis to appease your mother and sister, funding their vanity with stolen money and attempted mortgage fraud. You are a profound danger to the physical and financial well-being of this child." The ruling was a swift, devastating execution. I was granted immediate temporary sole legal and physical custody of Aria. Marcus was stripped of all visitation rights pending a comprehensive court-mandated psychological evaluation and the conclusion of the criminal investigations surrounding his embezzlement. A permanent restraining order was issued on the spot, barring Marcus, Eleanor, and Chloe from coming within 500 yards of me, my daughter, or my businesses. As the bailiff dismissed the court, I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. I finally turned to look at the gallery. Eleanor was hyperventilating, desperately trying to hide her face behind a knockoff handbag as she stared at the reporters who were already rushing out the double doors to file their sensational stories. The social and professional ruin was instantaneous. By the time I arrived back at my secure penthouse, local society blogs and news sites had published the sordid details of the hearing. Eleanor's pristine, carefully manufactured reputation disintegrated in a matter of hours. The prestigious country club she had sacrificed her dignity to join immediately revoked her membership, citing the public embarrassment of the embezzlement scandal. The wealthy elite women she had spent decades sycophantically trailing after instantly severed all contact, horrified by the grift. Chloe was unceremoniously dropped by her boutique modeling agency via a 2-sentence email. They were exposed as social pariahs, bankrupt, disgraced, and universally despised. The final beam was kicked out from under their house of cards the very next morning. Following the anonymous tip containing my forensic accounting, Mr. Sterling formally terminated Marcus for cause. The company immediately pressed criminal charges for the stolen corporate funds. Without Marcus's income or his stolen money to float their bloated expenses, the reality of their insolvency crashed down on them. Eleanor's heavily leveraged house went into active foreclosure. Chloe's maxed-out credit cards began bouncing all over town, and her leased sports car was repossessed in the middle of the night. With nowhere else to go, the three of them were forced to cram into a cheap 2-star motel off the interstate, surrounded by the stench of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The entire Blackwood ecosystem was utterly annihilated. They were left with absolutely nothing to fall back on, experiencing the exact same amount of mercy and support they had shown me when they locked me in the freezing cold. Absolutely none. A week later, I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, watching a dark winter storm roll over the glittering city skyline. Aria was sleeping peacefully in her nursery, and my life was finally returning to a state of quiet, beautiful equilibrium. The nightmare was over. Then the soft electronic chime of my private foyer elevator pierced the silence of the penthouse. I froze, the sparkling water I was holding pausing halfway to my lips. That elevator required a biometric scan and a coded keycard from the ground floor concierge to access my floor. My night nurse wasn't due for another hour, and I hadn't authorized any guests or deliveries. My heart gave a sharp, heavy thump against my ribs. I set my glass down on the quartz counter and moved cautiously out of the living room, stepping silently into the entryway. The heavy oak doors of the elevator hissed, sliding open to reveal the polished metal interior. Kneeling on the imported Italian marble of my private foyer, shivering uncontrollably in damp, filthy clothes he had likely been wearing for days, was Marcus. He looked feral. His hair was matted with sweat and freezing rain, his skin pale and gaunt. He had somehow bypassed the lobby security, slipping through the cracks of a building he never should have been able to access, driven by a madness that bordered on terrifying. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and brimming with the absolute terror of a man who had finally hit rock bottom. "Maya," he sobbed, his voice a ragged, desperate croak as he pressed his trembling hands together in a pathetic plea. "Please." Through the directional microphone in my earpiece, I listened as the final agonizing seconds of Marcus's professional life ticked away. The line went dead before he could even finish begging. Mr. Sterling wasn't interested in explanations about corporate expense accounts, because 2 days prior I had anonymously couriered a heavily encrypted flash drive directly to his office. It contained a masterclass in forensic accounting detailing every fraudulent expense, every padded invoice, and every microscopic redirection of funds Marcus had engineered to sustain his family's illusion of wealth. Marcus slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. He dropped the device onto the freezing asphalt, where the glass shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. His knees buckled, and he collapsed right there on the curb, burying his face in his hands, while his mother and sister watched in uncomprehending horror. I rolled up the tinted window of my SUV, shifted into drive, and quietly slipped out of the neighborhood. The prologue of my revenge was complete. Now it was time for the main event. The fallout over the next 48 hours was rapid, systematic, and absolutely merciless. Working with Thomas Vance, I officially filed for divorce and sole physical and legal custody of Aria. We didn't just file standard petitions, we dropped a tactical nuclear weapon on the county family court system. Thomas secured an immediate emergency hearing, leveraging the sheer undeniable severity of the evidence we submitted. When I walked through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom that Thursday morning, I felt entirely transformed. I was no longer the frightened, isolated woman crying in a snowbank. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit, my posture straight, projecting an aura of impenetrable, unbothered calm. Across the aisle, Marcus looked like a hollowed-out shell. Without access to the corporate funds he had been siphoning, and with his personal accounts frozen by an emergency injunction, he had been forced to hire a discount attorney who looked visibly pale and overwhelmed as he flipped through our massive binder of exhibits. Marcus's suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Eleanor and Chloe sat in the public gallery directly behind him. They tried to maintain their haughty, aristocratic posture, but their eyes darted nervously around the room, particularly toward the 3 local journalists who had caught wind of the embezzlement scandal and slipped into the back benches. The Honorable Judge Harrison, a magistrate with sharp, discerning eyes and a notoriously low tolerance for domestic abuse, took her seat at the bench. She didn't offer a polite greeting. She simply opened the file, her expression hardening into a mask of pure disgust. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge began, her voice slicing through the absolute silence of the courtroom. "I have spent the morning reviewing the petitioner's exhibits. I am looking at timestamped text messages which have been verified by your cellular provider. In these messages, you explicitly instruct your wife, who was less than a week postpartum and actively experiencing a medical hemorrhage, to go find a motel while you illegally altered the deadbolts on her legal residence." Marcus swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. "Your Honor, it was a highly stressful week. We had a terrible argument, and I didn't actually believe she would—" "You didn't believe she would what?" Judge Harrison interrupted, the temperature in the room plummeting. "Bleed out in the snow. Freeze to death while holding your newborn daughter. I am also looking at the credit card receipts from the roadside motel she was forced to walk to in the dead of night in freezing temperatures. The sheer, unmitigated cruelty of this action defies comprehension." Marcus shrank into his chair, looking incredibly small. His attorney wisely kept his mouth shut. But Thomas Vance was just getting started. We were there to drag every single skeleton out of the Blackwood closet and expose them to the harsh, unforgiving light. "Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to Exhibit F," Thomas said smoothly, standing and buttoning his jacket. "We have uncovered evidence of severe financial abuse and attempted mortgage fraud. My client's husband attempted to secure a $400,000 cash-out refinance on a property that belonged exclusively to my client's LLC. He did so by brazenly forging her signature." Thomas handed a secondary red-tabbed folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "We have provided sworn affidavits from a certified forensic handwriting analyst confirming the forgery." Thomas continued, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Furthermore, we have included the internal audit from Mr. Blackwood's former employer. This audit confirms that he systematically embezzled over $80,000 in corporate funds. And where did this stolen money go? It went to sustain the extravagant lifestyle of his mother and sister." A collective audible gasp echoed from the gallery. I didn't turn my head, but the sound of frantic whispering from the journalists in the back row was unmistakable. The financial records clearly show that the embezzled corporate funds were directly funneled into luxury spa retreats for Eleanor Blackwood and 5-figure designer shopping sprees for Chloe Blackwood, Thomas stated, driving the final nail into their coffin. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor let out a strangled, breathless noise. Her pristine, carefully manufactured social reputation, the very thing she valued above human life, was disintegrating in real time. Family court records were public. By the end of the day, every country club member, every wealthy neighbor, and every boutique agency in the city would know that the Blackwood dynasty was nothing more than a parasitic grift funded by stolen money. Judge Harrison closed the binder, her jaw set tightly. "Mr. Blackwood, you endangered the life of a fragile newborn. You abandoned your wife during a severe medical crisis to appease your mother and sister, funding their vanity with stolen corporate money and attempted real estate fraud. You are a profound danger to the physical and emotional well-being of this child." The ruling was an absolute devastating victory. I was granted immediate sole legal and physical custody of Aria. Marcus was stripped of all visitation rights pending a comprehensive court-mandated psychological evaluation and the conclusion of the criminal embezzlement investigations. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order legally barring Marcus, Eleanor, and Chloe from coming within 500 yards of me, my daughter, or my businesses. Their entire house of cards had officially collapsed. Marcus was unemployed, facing felony charges, and legally exiled from my life. Eleanor and Chloe were social pariahs, completely destitute and trapped in their squalid motel room without a dime of my money or Marcus's stolen funds to sustain them. When I finally returned to the 34th floor of my secure building later that evening, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The penthouse was warm and quiet, filled with the soft, ambient glow of the city lights below. I checked on Aria, who was sleeping soundly in her premium bassinet, watched over by a highly recommended private night nurse. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and leaned against the marble island, letting the tension of the past few weeks finally drain from my shoulders. It was over. I had won. My daughter and I were safe, insulated by a fortress of wealth, legal protection, and corporate security. Then the private, biometric-secured elevator that opened directly into my personal foyer emitted a sharp, electronic chime. I froze. My glass stopped halfway to my lips. The elevator required a specialized key card and a fingerprint scan from the ground floor concierge. My night nurse was already here, and I hadn't authorized any visitors. No one was supposed to be coming up. My heart gave a sudden, violent thump against my ribs. I set the glass down silently and moved toward the entryway, my pulse pounding in my ears. The heavy, brushed steel doors of the elevator hissed, sliding apart to reveal the brightly lit interior. There, kneeling on the imported Italian marble of my private foyer, was Marcus. He looked completely feral. His clothes were filthy and soaked from the winter rain, his face gaunt and shadowed by days of unshaven stubble. He had somehow bypassed the multi-million-dollar security system downstairs, likely tailgating a wealthy resident or exploiting a momentary shift change driven by a madness and desperation that bordered on the terrifying. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot wide and brimming with the absolute terror of a man who had finally hit rock bottom and realized there was no safety net left to catch him. "Maya," he sobbed, his voice a ragged, desperate croak as he pressed his trembling hands together, bowing his head in a pathetic, humiliating plea. "Please, Maya. Please.